Hi, I'm William Pinch. I'm chair of the Department of History at Wesleyan University. I've been at Wesleyan for 20 years, and I'm still learning what it means to be a historian. In fact, in many ways, when I came to Wesleyan, that process began. My colleagues here are an incredibly energetic and interesting bunch of people who think deeply about what it means to be a historian, but also because teaching students at Wesleyan constantly forces one to confront the past in new and interesting ways. So it's been a long and interesting intellectual journey since the early 1990s. These days I'm working on 3 different projects. One is a study of the events of 1857 in India, but also their reverberations worldwide through the British Empire and around the world. This was the mutiny of Indian soldiers against the British Army, the British Empire, mostly in North India, and it nearly brought the British Empire to a halt in South Asia. And it's a very interesting moment of violence and reform, and I'm interested in the ways in which it played out and the reasons for which it occurred. The second project that I'm working on is a translation of 2 poems describing the military career and political career of a early 19th, late 18th century warlord named Anupgiri Gosain. I'm doing this with 2 colleagues at Columbia who are in languages and literature. It's an early Hindi poem. Early Hindi is a little bit like Middle English as compared to modern English. And these poems really provide an unprecedented picture of the world in which this warlord lived, which was right at the transition moment from late Mughal rule to early British rule in South Asia. The third thing I'm working on these days actually comes out of my teaching. For the past few years I've taught a course called Waterways, Boats and Oceans in World History, and that course and that project really brings together 2 or 3 different historical traditions. One is traditional maritime history, which I've had a long interest in. The other is world history, particularly world history focused on large bodies of water as delimiting boundaries or ways of thinking about cultural units. So the Atlantic world, the Pacific world, the Mediterranean world. A third historical tradition, historiography that's more recent, is what's called marine environmental history, which really looks at resource issues in a particular marine habitat, but also is interested in the ways in which humans understand themselves in relationship to the particular coastal situation in which they live. So I'm bringing these 3 traditions together to try and think about perhaps the possibility of a new kind of maritime/marine history. So I'm chair of the history department, and that involves obviously lots of administrative work, running the department, making sure all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted. It's also been wonderful to get to meet the vast range of students that major in history. Prior to becoming chair, I really was exposed mostly to students who were interested in the kinds of things I did. But now being chair, I get to meet all the students in the department, and that's been a lot of fun. Gandhi's a sort of endlessly fascinating figure. He's actually quite in the news recently because of a recent biography that was published that's quite controversial. I find him interesting because he constitutes a kind of lens through which we can see a number of different arenas of world history. Certainly the rise of Indian nationalism and national consciousness in the late 19th century, early 20th century, the transformation of the national movement. Gandhi opens up or shines light on lots of different discrete historical phenomena, and he's a wonderful way to introduce students to the craft of history. He's a wonderful character and endlessly fascinating, and the students love him. love to learn more about him. The myths of Gandhi are quickly shattered in the class, and we pick up the pieces and rebuild him and understand him in new ways.